Hey everyone, it's Britt here with Green Beef Floral. We are a Zone 6 cut flower farm and retail boutique shop located in small town Southwestern Ontario, Canada. If you want more flower farming content, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like our content, and follow along with our flower farming journey. There are lots of videos on the internet today talking about the top 10 flowers to grow if you want to be a flower farmer and the success that comes along with that. However, in today's video, I want to talk about our top 10 favorite flowers to grow for wedding work based on current design trends and their usefulness in the wedding industry. So let's get right into it. The scope of how you choose to flower farm is incredibly large and can feel incredibly daunting. There is a huge community of growers putting out content that can make you feel like you will never find your niche in the industry. Instagram and Pinterest are both filled with motivated and talented growers, and it can make you feel like your little corner of the flower world will never succeed. And depending on where you are in the global commercial flower industry, the instability of existing trade relationships in 2025, which is mirroring a lot of what we saw with economic standstills in 2020, but for very different causes, that can open up doors for local flower growers to develop new relationships with florists, with wholesalers, and with wedding clientele within your immediate community. There are a lot of common import flowers that florists love for weddings. From roses and carnations to heirloom mums, protea and anthurium, the wedding flower industry is absolutely huge. And not only that, but it is worth a massive $11.4 billion worldwide. This means that flower farmers have a lot to gain from growing high quality blooms to bring to florists and also to design with themselves, specifically for the wedding industry. So today, I want to throw all of what we think we know about flower farming out the window. We are not talking about our 10 favorite flowers to grow on the flower farm as a farmer florist. Today, we are going to talk about our 10 favorite flowers and 2 honorary mentions that we love to grow for wedding work based on current trends and where we see the demands from our network of florists and clients who source from our flower farm. So let's start with the honorary mentions. The first honorary mention is ranunculus. And I know it's going to seem really crazy to have ranunculus as an honorary mention because it's such a popular wedding flower, either in its form of the butterfly ranunculus series or as a traditional ranunculus. It's no secret that ranunculus are one of the most popular flowers in the wedding industry right now and on the market. They are long lasting. They feel super luxurious to handle, and they come in a ton of gorgeous colors. The blooms hold up really well when handled in wedding bouquets over the course of the day because wedding bouquets are a high traffic, high visibility part of the wedding day itself. Ranunculus themselves make such a big impact in floral design. For flower growers, ranunculus generally require specialty knowledge in order to grow them well enough to sell to a florist or a wholesaler. And I can say this because I know this from experience as somebody who is both a flower farmer and owns a retail floral shop. So it's really important to note that ranunculus do not produce well in every single climate. That's part of what makes them lucrative. They are extremely susceptible to damage from heat. They prefer growing in greenhouses in early spring where you have long, warm days and really cool nights. And they can be a culprit for absolutely disastrous aphid infestations and powdery mildew infections. This is why we recommend having an actionable prevention schedule to combat these issues if you plan on investing in ranunculus to sell at a florist level. The benefits to flower farmers, however, is that ranunculus are generally expensive for florists to purchase wholesale, making them a really, really lucrative and popular crop. So growing the Italian, Elegance, and Cloney series in particular is extremely advantageous for flower farmers. Professionally, where I live in Canada, professionally grown ranunculus can be priced anywhere or cost florists anywhere from $3.75 a stem to $5.50 a stem. And I think right now, as we speak, I'm seeing them for about $4.25, and we are coming into the height of ranunculus season here in Ontario, Canada. Florists expect this flower to be at least 12 inches in stem height if they are getting them from a wholesaler, and they need a bloom that is usable, and so they expect the bloom to be at least 3 inches wide. The taller and the bigger your ranunculus is, the better luck you will have selling to florists and wholesalers. But they can be difficult, which is why they're an honorary mention. And so on that note, the second honorary mention for us is peony, which may surprise you as well. Again, two of the most popular cut flowers for the wedding industry. I am putting these as honorary mention because there's so much work. Peonies are easy most of the time. They are one of the most popular wedding flowers, and often couples will choose the date of their wedding around peony season. It's not uncommon to see in the industry. However, the window for peony season is extremely short, and not all varieties bloom at the same time. So when you start your season, they begin with the coral charm. You work into your whites, your yellows, and typically peony season ends with the deep reds and the ever popular Sarah Bernhardts. If you do decide to grow peony for wedding, we recommend coral charm, the beautiful coral peony with an open center, which we love, and the gorgeous white Duchess de Nemours. These are particularly popular and will sell well for weddings. The challenge, however, with peonies and growing them as a flower farmer is that they are incredibly low maintenance until they're not. Peonies will start popping out of the ground usually around this time. So we're talking early to mid-April here in my zone 6 flower farm. They require absolutely no attention. You don't have to do anything to them. You just let them come out of the ground until all at once they all need to be disbudded and picked while you're in the middle of weeding and irrigating the rest of your farm. And then they have to be harvested. Peony blooms need to be picked at exactly the right moment for longevity because their actual bloom time is so short and their flowers open really, really quickly. They have to be stored in a cooler because their bloom season is so incredibly short. The flower market tends to be oversaturated with peonies when they are in season for only a few weeks, which drives their stem price significantly down. Many florists will be purchasing popular plentiful varieties from the wholesalers for $2.75 a stem at the height of peony season, while hobby growers are selling them for $1 a piece off marketplace or roadside stands. And so that's something to consider if you plan to grow and sell peonies, is thinking about what your market is. Because both ranunculus and peonies require a lot of investment and infrastructure and expertise to grow well, I have listed them as honorary mentions because of their popularity, but not as must grows. As a rule, I think it's really important to remember that florists expect stems to be at least 12 to 18 inches tall. So you'll need to learn and be okay with cutting deep into the plants for each one of the flowers that we are going to talk about. For each of these, we also recommend having a flower fridge and cooling infrastructure in place to properly condition flowers before sending them off to a florist. It's important to remember that generally flowers need to be picked either in the morning or in the evening when the heat of the day is the lowest. And flowers should spend at minimum 12 to 24 hours rehydrating in the cooler with the water and the hydrating solution before they go off to their destination. So now that we've got those out of the way, we are going to talk about our top 10 flowers to grow for weddings as a flower farmer. So the first flower on my list is probably going to surprise a lot of you. And that's because the first flower that I recommend growing for wedding work, cosmos. One of the easiest flowers that you can possibly grow in the garden, next to probably zinnias. Cosmos are inexpensive and they are very sought after in wedding work right now. As flower farmers, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of us have love-hate relationships with cosmos because their bloom season or their bloom time from when you pick them when the flower opens is so short that as a farmer florist looking to sell them in market bouquets, that makes them an incredibly annoying flower to pick, to harvest, and to design with because the blooms die back so quickly, right? However, that feature is what makes them so lucrative in the flower farming industry. They are extremely special because a lot of design styles have moved from very traditional and tight into light, garden-inspired, and airy. And there's nothing more airy than a cosmo blowing, specifically a white, single-petaled cosmo blowing in the wind. So, harvesting and conditioning cosmos for florist use so that they will open and hold their petals for a couple's big day is a basic and necessary skill that every flower farmer should learn how to master. Our favorite cosmos to grow for weddings are Double Click White, Sensation White, and Cupcake Blush. I think the reason for that is fairly obvious color-wise. But as far as style, the Cupcake Blush and the Sensation White have predominantly single petals, although the Cupcake has the fun cupcake interior. But the fizzy white, the Double Click White, I think is an important addition to that because double cosmos tend to be longer lasting than single cosmos. And so they're a great way to kind of start your journey into growing cosmos for wedding work because they tend to be a little bit hardier with handling. We on the flower farm sell branching cosmos to a local wholesaler for about $1 a stem, which means that I get $10 a bunch from a wholesaler for a cosmos. That makes it one of my most profitable crops that we grow on the farm based on a seed to flower ratio. Cosmos do require infrastructure though, like netting. They generally like landscape fabric and prefer crappy soil. And they do need to be deadheaded at least twice a week in order to supply continuous blooms. They can also be susceptible to powdery mildew later on in the season, so it's important that they have enough airflow. Deadheading can be really overwhelming when you have, 500 to 1,000 plants, and so it's important to kind of reel in your expectations of what you're able to accomplish, but bearing in mind that keeping yourself on a schedule with all of this can give you a great crop that can be sold to florists for a decent profit margin. Next on the list is dahlias. Everybody loves a good dahlia. The dahlia growing season where I am, or at least the blooming season, is normally from about the end of July all the way until frost. And they are the reason that a lot of us have gotten sucked into the flower farming world. Let's be honest, we've all seen florets dahlias and thought to ourselves, hey, these are great. I want to grow 1,000 of them. And then we did, in some form or another. Dahlias are popular for wedding work because of their large blooms, their interesting shapes, and their variety of color. We've noticed out of our shop that the favorite dahlia colors by far are white, rust, apricot, deep red, burgundy, blush, orange, and peach. We do not do a lot of lavender or purple dahlias for wedding work because it's just not the trending color in weddings right now. We do find that ball dahlias are one of the most popular shapes, but we are also seeing that collarettes and anemone style dahlias are increasing in popularity because they really do mimic the feel of a cosmo with having a better vase life. Ball dahlias in particular do extremely well out of water for a day, and so they've become really popular for wedding bouquets, especially in the fall. Cafe au lait will always be the queen of the dahlia world because of her huge blush coffee colored creamy blooms and the shape, and they're very popular for centerpieces as well as installations because the blooms take up a lot of space and bring a lot of impact to a florist's design. For us personally, we find that Cornell Bronze, Cafe au lait, and Boom Boom White were our most used dahlias for the 2024 wedding season due to the colors requested by couples. As we get later into the wedding season, when dahlias bloom, you see a lot more boho style weddings with oranges and rusts and whites and browns kind of, tagging off of the cappuccino rose. And so a good Cornell Bronze dahlia really fits into that aesthetic extremely well. And so, incidentally, does Boom Boom White. If you don't like the centers of Boom Boom White, there are other white dahlias that are more of a traditional shape that you can choose instead that don't have like the pollen viewed at the center. Dahlias should be picked at least 3 nodes deep for maximum stem length, taking all of the bottom layers of foliage off so that the plant is focused on keeping the flower alive. And flowers themselves should be about 3/4 of the way open, giving the florist an actual design window to use them. Part of what you have to do as a flower farmer is understand that when you are harvesting the blooms, they are not going to the market in 2 days. You are very likely going to be dropping those flowers off to either the wholesaler or the florist up to 4 or 5 days before the event. And so you have to be really good at recognizing what stage to harvest blooms at so that they have the longest life for the person who is designing with them. I even recommend implementing that strategy of picking if you are designing for yourself into how and when you are picking blooms to maximize your ability to design with those flowers as well. It's not uncommon for us on our flower farm to pick dahlias for events at the end of the week on Monday and put them in the flower cooler to hydrate for several days before we take them out and use them. Next on the list will be no surprise to anybody, and that is because the next flower that I recommend growing is lisianthus. 2024 was our first season growing lisianthus on the flower farm, and it is now a staple in our flower field. Farm-grown lisianthus is the perfect wedding flower, hands down. It comes in a variety of colors and shapes, from deep purple to white to cream to green to apricot to blush, even to brown. Lisianthus can last up to 3 weeks in a vase if picked and processed correctly. And the Corelli and Voyage series in particular produce absolutely ginormous blooms that easily double in size from the traditional series of lisianthus that florists get from their wholesalers. If you have spent any time in the flower farming world, however, you know the lisianthus is a labor of love and requires a lot of patience, right? Most growers begin seeding lisianthus 6 months before they plan to put the actual seedlings in the ground. And larger growers sometimes just order plugs because the amount of space that they take in the grow room when you could easily be doing starts of other varieties of flowers like a Cosmo is just, it's a commitment, right? So they will often order plugs so that they can have multiple successions of lisianthus growing throughout the entire season. Because when you're growing lisianthus as a wedding crop, you have to change the way you think about harvesting. And that is to say that even though lisianthus can function as a cut and come again flower, primarily growers who are growing these flowers in order to sell them at a wholesale market treat lisianthus as a one and done. And that means they're not going in and saving those offshoots so that they can have more flowers later, because they're not market farmers. They're not market gardeners in this capacity. What florists want and kind of expect is the entire plant of lisianthus. So it's not uncommon for us, even at the shop, to get a bunch of regular white lisianthus that still has the roots attached to it. And that is because the growers and the harvesters simply pulled out the entire plant, bunched it up, sent it off to the wholesale market. When you grow lisianthus, it's also really important to understand how to harvest it so that the wedding florist gets the absolute best version of the flower that they possibly can. It is really, really fundamentally important to trim that first center bloom off of the lisianthus to help promote the side shoots to open. You see this with lisianthus, but you also see this as a practice with a lot of branching mums that come into flower shops. And it's because lisianthus buds do not bloom for the florist once they are cut from the plant. And so you, as the flower farmer, can take some initiative to make sure that the florist is getting the maximum amount of usable blooms on one stem by doing that tedious work of pinching that center bloom out before you send the flowers off to them. Lisianthus is also expensive to purchase as a florist. It's right now sitting as a florist grower in Southwestern Ontario. We are seeing lisianthus stems anywhere from $2 to $2.20 per stem wholesale. And that price actually does go up when farm-grown lisianthus starts coming on, because the quality of farm-grown lizzie is just so much better. And often florists will in fact pay the premium price for the premium bloom, but you have to have the stem length on it. The next flower on my list, I've talked about a lot on this channel, so this is not going to be a surprise for anyone. That flower is delphinium. Delphinium is becoming incredibly popular in the flower industry, especially for event and wedding work. And I fully accredit this to historical romances and historical dramas like Bridgerton and Downton Abbey, both because of colorways, right? I've talked about how bridal trends are very much influenced by popular culture. And so this year we see a lot of white, blue, and yellow because of Bridgerton's like Colin and Penelope season and their colors. However, the actual structure, the spike, the line flower, and the beautiful big plumes very much harken to European design aesthetic that can be found in Downton Abbey and has really become increasingly popular in North American design. The cottage garden aesthetic is extremely trendy in wedding floral right now. And those massive flowering spikes that you get from a flower like delphinium has a huge impact on installation work. And its side shoots can also be used for smaller scale projects like bud vases, corsages, and boutonnieres. Delphinium is also one of the few blooming blue plants in nature. But not only that, it's one of only several light blue blooming plants. And light blue is a really, really popular color right now, especially in combination with all sorts of other really lovely pastels. We're talking lavender purples, whites, apricots, blushes, buttery yellows, those really, really lovely pastels that a lot of young brides are really gravitating towards at this time. And so light blue delphinium has really become a very high-end bloom in the wedding industry. And right now, I just looked it up before filming this video, delphinium stems are selling for about $2.30 here in Ontario, and all of the stems that we have on the market are actually coming from Ecuador. I've also found that similarly to lisianthus, the price of delphinium does actually go up during its popular season and its growing season because the demand for it is so high, because there are so many weddings that want to use it, that wholesalers, growers cannot keep enough of it in stock. Especially because at the end of July, local delphinium season in Canada anyways is for the most part finished. You might get another flush coming out September and October, but you're much less likely to have brides and couples at the end of the summer wanting those pastels, that white, the blue, and the yellow palette, because they've moved into more fall, rusty, deep colors. And blue delphinium is just not going to cut it for that. Now, delphinium itself does require some essential infrastructure. You are going to need to net it. It's going to need to be fertilized in order to get those proper big, huge, plumy blooms that we love. And it's going to need a little bit of shade and mulch in order to protect its roots and its flowers from the heat of the summer. It prefers temperate springs and summers and really does not like dry heat that will take the plant out. Well-grown delphinium is an asset to designers. But even as a perennial, it's really important for flower farmers to recognize that they should actually treat it as a biennial, because you are taking its flowers, and that is part of what allows it to feed itself and reproduce. So it's important that I think with delphinium, you recognize that every couple years, you're likely going to need to purchase new seeds. Otherwise, create a section of the field that you don't harvest from so that those plants can be subdivided as you increase and change your crop over time. Next up on the list, bachelor's buttons. I know. Bachelor's buttons also are called cornflower, depending on who you are and where in the world you live, is a crop that I personally will never get rid of in my flower farm. At least 70% of the bachelor's buttons that I grow are sold to my local wholesaler or to event florists instead of moved through a retail boutique as like everyday flowers. Bachelor's buttons, like cosmos, are not a long-lasting flower, which makes them not particularly popular for everyday blooms and not a favorite of market gardeners or farmer florists that are selling at markets because they die quickly. They don't hold well, and they're very dainty, and they droop quickly. However, like cosmos, that is exactly why they are popular for event work. They are whimsical, and a lot of the time, they're blue. And we've talked about this already, where blue is an incredibly popular color right now and one of the hardest colors to find in nature, which makes bachelor's buttons lucrative to flower farmers who can grow them well for stem length and get them to florists quickly. Growers can monopolize always when you're thinking about flowers that you are growing on your farm for event work, for florists, for weddings. You can monopolize on current trends, and I strongly recommend that you do. They are popular accent flowers in wedding bouquets and bud vases, and normally they are sold as single stem bunches in 20 stems, like 20 stemmed bunches by wholesalers. Once I had to actually source in bachelor's buttons for an event that I needed, and I counted out the stems, and I was really surprised to find that the cornflowers were just single stems without any branching on them, and probably about 10 inches tall. Now, when we bunch them, I leave a lot of the branching on, but if you do decide that you are going to cut them and sell them as single stems, you can almost always do that using only one or two plants once you get into the heart of bachelor button season, because a lot of florist blue boy varieties that are on the market now, specifically the variety that we grow from Johnny's, definitely branches out, and when they start to open, you can cut all of those side pieces. The other benefit of growing a bachelor's buttons for wholesale is that you can harvest them when they are just starting to crack open. So you don't need to wait until that bloom is fully open, because they will continue to open on their own. And that is an extremely handy feature if you are growing this very short-lived flower for wedding work. Bachelor's buttons are also easy. You can direct seed them in the fall or the early spring as soon as the snow melts and forget about them until they need to be harvested. And that is about the best thing in the world when you are considering growing something for profit, because it requires very little work and gives you a decent gain back financially from them. You just have to wade through a sea of these plants in order to cut them, and that is honestly the most tedious part of the process. They do prefer a cooler, so it is important that they rehydrate before they go anywhere, and it is absolutely best to pick bachelor's buttons in the morning as opposed to the evening, because they will have had the evening to hydrate themselves, and so it's much less of a shock when you put them into the fridge in the morning than it can be in the evening after they have been out in the hot sun all day. They also cross-pollinate over the years. It's almost impossible to get bachelor's buttons out of the field once you have planted them, which creates some really interesting bloom varieties if you do allow some of them to just reseed on their own. And that is great for the ecology of the flower community as a whole, because essentially you are creating some new varieties, and we love that. In keeping with the theme of blue, lastly, we have nigella. Lastly in the theme, we're only on like number 6. So nigella, again, is hit or miss if you are growing it as a flower for a market bouquet, because in order to sell it, you want to have that top bloom or some of the blooms that are around open so that the customer can see what they are getting. And nigella tends to drop its pollen and its petals extremely quickly, which gives it a bit of a love-hate relationship for growers who want to use it for market bouquets. However, like all of the other flowers we've talked about, it's one of the reasons why florists love it for wedding work. First of all, nigella is light blue. It also comes in pink, and it comes in white. And it has one of the most beautiful little tiny star flowers you have ever seen. And when it grows well, can actually be like 1.5 inches across. So it's a really beautiful flower that has a lot of interesting texture to it, and that is part of what makes it so popular for events. Now, I know that market gardeners, market farmers love to grow it for its pods, and if that's the way you want to go, that's great. In my personal experience with wedding work, it's less common to see nigella pods than it is actually to see the flowers. And I have gotten $1.50 a stem for well-grown nigella, which makes it, again, a very, very profitable crop to grow. Depending on where you live, it can be direct seeded. However, for us personally on the flower farm, we definitely do pre-sprout it and plant it out as single plants so that I can count the amount of plants that I have and know exactly the amount that I am harvesting. Nigella definitely needs a cooler. It absolutely has to be rehydrated after you pick it, because just like bachelor's buttons, any offshoots tend to take a minute to rehydrate well so that the whole plant is standing up straight. And if you get them at the right time in the season, and I find that for nigella, where we are in zone 6, June into the first week of July is really the prime time for using and growing nigella to get stem lengths that are tall enough for florists to use. That said, the popularity of bud vases right now does make some of those smaller offshoots really popular. So if you are planning to grow nigella and you don't know if you have the climate to get the really, really tall flowers, have a conversation with your local florist or somebody that you have a good relationship in the flower industry to find out if it's a flower that they could actually use and need. The downside of nigella, design-wise, is that it is a terrible, terrible plant for boutonnieres and corsages. The petals just don't stand up well. But for installations, some of the best work that I have seen from some of my florist friends has been using the airy nature of the nigella to just bring that extra little bit of texture, because it's such a unique bloom that is underused but also becoming much more popular, and I'm seeing a lot more of it in mood boards that we are getting from couples for this upcoming year. Number 7 on my list of flowers to grow for weddings is celosia. And I'm not talking about coxcomb style celosia, which is the one that when it blooms is really big and looks like brains. I am talking about the wheat style celosia, like Pompous Plume or Shimmer, which is a new variety from Johnny's, or Flamingo Feather, which are taller varieties that have really wispy, kind of broom style florets on the end, and they are most popular with florists right now in the very apricot tones because it's useful across most seasons. For us at the flower farm, our most popular varieties are without a doubt the terracotta, Selway terracotta, and the flamingo feather. Selway terracotta takes a little bit more time to get going. It does tend to be a little bit shorter than your like traditional pampas plume variety celosia and the flamingo feather celosia, but its coloring is incredibly popular right now, both as a like early kind of summer flower, but also into the fall as it's really taken on a lot of height and depth to it because florists will use it both fresh and dried. Celosia is a great flower to grow if florists are looking for some dainty pieces for boutonnieres and corsages, little tiny wispy pieces where they don't necessarily want a full piece of amaranth in a bouquet, but also it has a lot of different color varieties that I think as a flower farmer you can produce a bunch and sell them at a decent amount to wholesalers. Now, I have personally noticed that while celosia is not a flower that is specifically requested by couples, it does fit into the category of a usable flower that is versatile for a lot of colorways. And what I will say about celosia is that it does well in most design mediums, whether it is chicken wire and water or whether you are sticking it in something like a flower foam. And I'm going to mention both because regardless of where you stand on the no flower foam debate, the reality is that florists are using them. They are using it. And it is really helpful as a flower farmer to understand how these flowers do work in those mediums. And so what I will say from our own experience is that feather style, plume style celosia is more long lasting in installations in flower foam, meadow style installations than a coxcomb celosia. And it's because the stems tend to be thinner, whereas coxcomb celosia that we get in usually in the summer have very, very thick stems on them. And it makes it really difficult for them to take up water properly if you're sticking them in something like a flower foam. They have the same problem that like a woody stem does, right? That said, I definitely do find that the most popular celosias that we grow are the apricots. We are starting to see a shift into florists wanting the like dark ruby red varieties. And I think a lot of that is because really dark burgundies and dark reds and oranges and kind of those like really lovely deep berry tones are really popular in the fall right now. But for a lot of summer weddings, we are still seeing that the terracotta stock color and the blush, the flamingo feather, are hands down the most popular, and I will never not grow those to give to the florists, and because we use them ourselves as well. Now, following in that same line, the next flower, so flower number 7 that I recommend growing for wedding and events is amaranthus or amaranth. Amaranthus has to be one of the most underrated and interesting types of flowers, grains that are on the market for high-end floristry. There is an absolutely crazy trend right now that is kind of like the next phase after the like very European cottage garden style floristry that puts calla lilies and orchids in arrangements with beautiful hanging plumy amaranth. And I am talking about like the coral fountain and the green fountain varieties that just have interesting shapes and textures and will hang down from the pillars and the platforms that these types of installations are sitting on, that just create such a wow factor. The thing you have to understand about amaranth, and I think is why it's really important that we look at this from a local flower farmer's perspective, is that it does not import well at all. Amaranth, as soon as it spends too much time in a cooler, gets moldy and gross and starts to smell. And so fresh amaranth, I think, is really an incredible opportunity for flower farmers to connect with higher end florists, because it's a crop that really, really does best fresh. Now, it does still need to be properly conditioned, but it shouldn't be spending 4 to 5 days in a cooler, and it definitely doesn't love being flown. If we are getting amaranth that's coming from like not locally any point in the season, typically it's coming in from the Netherlands, and it's well priced. We're still paying around $2 to $2.50 a stem for like high quality amaranth with like long tails. However, where I am in my microclimate in small town Southwestern Ontario, we have terrible, terrible luck growing those types of varieties. So primarily on our farm, we focus on the velvet curtains and the hot biscuits varieties, although I have grown coral fountain in the past, it hasn't done well. And so I will continue to do that. But if you are a grower who has a dry enough and temperate enough climate that amaranth is going to grow extremely well for you, I cannot recommend enough to get on the train of getting the amaranth that has the trains, right? I get so many inquiries every single year with flowers that look like this, and the orchids and the callas are one thing. They're extremely expensive. It's because orchids in general are extremely expensive to purchase, but amaranth is truly one of the hardest plants to source at a good quality as a florist, and it's in large part because it doesn't transport well. So as a flower farmer in 2025, if you have not added amaranth to your farm yet, I recommend doing that and connect with a high-end florist that is willing to purchase from you. And I'm not talking about your florist that has a shop in the middle of their like small town. I am talking about the florist that does weddings at designer like estates with clients that have like budgets of $10,000 plus for their flowers for their wedding day, because those are the florists who are seeking out this product and are going to pay what it is worth because they know that it is going to positively impact the quality of their design. And as flower farmers, I think it's really easy for us to get caught up in the, oh, we just want to grow all of the flowers, while also forgetting that the fundamental purpose of us growing flowers for a wedding industry florist is that we have to provide a product that is going to elevate the designer's skills and the designer's designs, for lack of better word, because that's what our job is as that flower farmer. It's not a market bouquet. You can't go into this expecting that you're going to receive 50 cents a stem for a piece of amaranth, because the reality is that when you're growing and selling a high-end stem of flowers to a florist, that stem is worth infinitely more than what it would be worth if you were just selling it to a customer at the farmer's market. I'm going to touch on that again later, but I think that's an important conversation to come back to, but I want to finish this list. So let's get into the next one. Number 9 on my list of flowers to grow for wedding floristry is eucalyptus. If you can, grow as much eucalyptus as humanly possible, because you will sell every single stem. Eucalyptus has been one of the most popular wedding foliages in North America for at least the last 10 years. I mean, I got married back in 2016 and I had eucalyptus in my bouquets back then, because we were just getting kind of onto that like farm girl aesthetic with the sunflowers and the eucalyptus on Pinterest. And that, even though that aesthetic has changed, eucalyptus and its use has not. Because if you as a florist have a bride who wants white roses, white calla lilies, white orchids, the chances are they also want a good baby blue eucalyptus. It is the most requested foliage for table garlands, for installations, for wedding bouquets. You could grow every variety of eucalyptus that you have as a North American grower in a climate where it cannot perennialize, and you will still sell every single stem. To grow eucalyptus well, you absolutely need to grow it in a hoop house. You need to be able to moderate its climate, and you need to be able to moderate its water intake. Eucalyptus is susceptible to some bugs. However, it tends to be fairly resilient, and it's particularly special when it is a locally grown eucalyptus in northern climates because it's not native to our climates. However, because it is a tree and not a shrub or a bush, it is not invasive. Eucalyptus grown from the seeds that we get takes years before it produces seed pods that are going to allow it to spread throughout your greenhouses and your gardens. So for the first 6 years, you are still going to have to go through, cut it back every fall, purchase new seeds to continue growing or beef up your crop until it's old enough essentially to produce seed pods, which is how we get eucalyptus to begin with. Eucalyptus is so popular because of its aroma, and it is incredibly popular because of its color. Eucalyptus has a gray-blue tone to it that makes it one of the most favorite foliages for couples to have. Because it's not such a stark green, it really does help to soften a lot of designs. And eucalyptus is not cheap. Baby blue eucalyptus right now on average is sold by weight and not by stem quantity, and we typically see anywhere from 6 to 10 stems in a bunch, and we're paying $23 Canadian for the weight of the eucalyptus and not the stems. It is definitely worth it to grow it as a crop. You will have every wedding florist knocking on your door wanting to buy your eucalyptus, especially in colder climates in North America. If you can figure out how to turn that crop into something that is year-round and pesticide-free, you will absolutely have one of the most lucrative crops in the wedding industry. And it is okay if you can only grow them as annuals. That is okay. Really, if it wasn't for the greenhouses that we have out at the farm, I would be growing eucalyptus as annuals too. And it's a lot of time and energy put into a very, very slow growing crop, although it is not as slow growing as lisianthus is. You get a minimal harvest for something like that. And so you have to remember with eucalyptus that because it is so slow growing for farmers like us, you really want to make sure that you are selling it to the clientele, that you are going to get the best price for it, because it is worth more than that 30 cents a stem that you're probably pricing it at when you're putting it in market bouquets. Stop it. Sell it to the highest bidder. Work on getting that eucalyptus crop up into a wholesale market, because your return on investment for that crop will be infinitely better, and it will be used by designers who are experts in their field, and you will get to support local couples with euc that is not laced in pesticides, because it is typically imported into whatever country it has to come from. And as an aside on eucalyptus, I also just want to talk about the fact that specifically for Canadian flower farmers, most of the eucalyptus that we see coming into our market is either from Australia or it is coming from the United States. And I'm not saying to not purchase that eucalyptus. Depending on what time of year it is, a lot of it comes from Australia, but at this point where we are in the season, a large quantity of the eucalyptus that I'm seeing at the wholesale market is from the US. I think that we need to have elements of grace for the farmers that are impacted by all of the crazy that is happening right now, but because of retaliatory tariffs, I know, which is a bad word, and I hope YouTube doesn't not push out this video because of that. But because of just the retaliatory nature of the economic issues that we're having in North America right now, the price of eucalyptus has gone up at least $4 a bunch where I am. And so I do genuinely think that if we can start creating a network of Canadian growers who can supply wholesalers with Canadian grown eucalyptus in greenhouses, we would really be on to something absolutely fantastic to stabilize that part of the wedding industry here. Because eucalyptus was another plant that during the pandemic was hard to get simply because of the fact that planes weren't flying in and out of countries and everything was shut down. And so flower farmers themselves, at least for the first couple months, really were scrambling to figure out if we could get eucalyptus out to florists. And so now even more with the, with wedding season upcoming, I do genuinely think that if we can network together, stabilize the eucalyptus quantity available in stabilize the eucalyptus crops available in Canada, and like hint to the government, like let's have a conversation about supporting and investing in your flower farmers. But like eucalyptus, man, it is a fabulous crop for flower farmers, specifically for the wedding industry, because oh man, it is the most used greenery that we use for everything. Now, flower number 10 is going to be no surprise to any of you that watch my channel in the spring, and that flower is anemone. Unlike ranunculus, anemones I don't think have the like cult following in the wedding world that ranunculus do, but it's starting. Anemones have really come a long way in the last few years as far as new varieties that are bred. You're not just getting your minstrel varieties anymore. By minstrel, I mean like your Bianconero variety, right? The traditional white anemone with the dark center. Bordeaux, grape, and blush Rosa Chiaro anemones, as well as some of the double frilled full star varieties, have really started to take hold on the luxury designer wedding floral market. And so it is an absolutely great crop to invest in, although it may take a couple years for florists to start responding to the anemones specifically. I found that since we started growing them, and I'm getting really excited about them, it's been kind of a slow process to get some of my farmer florists or my regular florist friends like on board with anemones as like use them in your design work. And I think a lot of that is because there's such a traditional view of just the blue, like the purple blue anemones, and then your traditional Bianconeros, because that's what's been available to florists for so long. And so the influx of all of these new varieties of anemones on the market is really going to make it, I think, open ground for designers specifically to get really, really excited about new things that are coming down the line. And so as the farmers, now we have the opportunity to get ahead of that, which is why anemones for me are on like this list every single time. Beyond the fact that the Bianconero anemones are lovely, when you pick anemones at the correct time, they do have up to a 2-week vase life. Anemones do not have nodes on the leaf, like where their leaves are, like ranunculus, which makes them a straight shoot flower, which I personally find easy to wire if you have to, and easier to design with, because you don't have to worry about it breaking necessarily in one particular spot, where ranunculus are really common to have like their heads tip, or they will typically like break at a leaf node as you go up. That's a common problem. Anemones shine towards the light, and it doesn't matter what time of year you get them or what variety you're getting them, they shine towards the light. They like to have their faces out. And with the change in some of the colors and the styles of the petals that are available now, anemones really are becoming a diverse flower for more than just like your white wedding. Now, on average, anemones have a longer growing season than ranunculus, where I am here in zone 6 growing them in a greenhouse. They start their season typically the end of February for us and produce blooms straight until the middle of July. They go dormant and then they start coming back again, usually in October and November for about 6 weeks, and bloom again, which makes anemones, in my opinion, a much more profitable crop than ranunculus, which is why they are on this list while ranunculus is sitting as an honorary mention. And while a good quality anemone corm typically costs anywhere between about 85 cents to $1.20 depending on the variety, ranunculus corms typically start around $1.30. And so with all of that in mind, I think that anemones really need to be on the table as possibly one of the most important flowers to grow as a farmer florist looking to sell to a wedding florist. or looking to sell in the wedding industry. Even when we think about money and profit margins of an anemone stem, at the wholesale level, a long 10-inch stem, Bianco Nero anemone that's coming from either the Netherlands or from one of the large commercial growers is selling for about $2.75 to $3.75 a stem. Now, unlike ranunculus, anemones just keep putting out blooms. There's no cap on the amount of flowers that they will produce before the plant gets tired. And overall, they tend to be a little bit more resilient to influxes of heat and also some pests. While aphids like them, they won't decimate a crop of anemones the same way they will decimate a crop of ranunculus. For me, if I'm looking financially between the two to purchase an anemone corm versus buying a ranunculus corm, while ranunculus are incredibly popular right now and appear to be all that, anemones are really like the better financial investment than ranunculus is, because you don't need the netting. They do prefer a greenhouse, but they don't care whether they're drip irrigated or whether they're watered overhead. They're much more resilient to heat. They produce many more stems. They will perennialize in greenhouses in cold climates, or in warmer climates they should come back year after year. And so the price per corm and the stem price that you can get for a good anemone is just higher than what you are going to get as a profit margin on a ranunculus. And that's just the truth. I might put in like, okay, so for context, for us on the flower farm, we have about 700 anemones, which is insane, planted in the greenhouse. And we do put the plants fairly tight together. And for the most part, they have overwintered and are putting out blooms again, which means I've purchased them once. I did not dig them up, not destroying those corms. They've easily produced almost 25 to 30 stems each plant between the 2 years, whereas I'm maximum getting like maybe 3 to 4 stems off of a ranunculus. And so I think that those types of numbers have to be taken into account if you're considering what's best financially for growing flowers and selling them into the wedding industry. Now, in case you haven't figured it out, my list is predominantly easy to grow varieties of flowers that are considered luxury flowers in the wedding industry, but a lot of the times are not as highly valued in everyday market bunches. When we're sitting here thinking as flower farmers about what a cheap flower is, we immediately think about flowers that's vase lives are not high, because we're selling to a customer that's expecting to have bouquets sit on their table for anywhere between 4 to 10 days, depending on what the average stem length or stem life is in a vase for a lot of these different varieties of flowers, because that's what they've been conditioned to as somebody who's purchasing flowers from a farmer or directly from a flower shop. But when we're talking about events, all of those little niche blooms that add a lot of visual interest and structure and whimsy, for lack of a better word, to a designer's actual design are the flowers that are the most valuable at a wholesale level, which is why cosmos is at the top of my list. We on our farm grow about 5 to 600 cosmo plants every single year, and I cannot cut enough of them for wholesale. I just can't. We don't put them in the majority of our everyday stuff because of their vase life. We'll get complaints from my clients out of the retail store, but florists who are designing especially high-end weddings absolutely love a cosmo. Even something like Queen Anne's lace and Dara are very, very popular wedding flowers right now because the very natural meadow style look is really, really in style. Florists in general are gravitating towards very organic feeling designs right now, and luxury clients are absolutely scooping those up. And so to grow flowers for the wedding industry, flower farmers have to change their mindset about what they think a good flower is, and understand our job as flower farmers is to figure out ways to bring that goodness to a larger market, develop those relationships with the florists and the wholesalers, retail boutiques, these places that are selling to your luxury florists, grow really, really beautiful flowers. It may mean that you as a grower are specializing in a crop. And I think it also bears in mind that flower farming for weddings looks different because it does often involve specialization. You're not growing all things just because. You are growing luxury flowers for luxury clients for one person's big day, and that means that those flowers have to be as perfect as they can be. Growing for weddings is going to stretch you as a florist designer. It's going to stretch you as a flower farmer because you are going to have to go back to fundamentals to grow really, really great flowers. And it means you are going to have to invest your energy, your time, and your money into specializing in crops that you haven't thought about their possibility yet. Cornflower, nigella, cosmos are great examples of these because oftentimes we look at these flowers and we think, oh, they're weeds. But they are some of the most desired flowers in the industry because their daintiness is what makes them beautiful. I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope it gave you some insight into current trends. I hope it's encouraged you to reach out to your local florists and develop new relationships with them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope all of you have a great week. We will catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.